Eliza Me Carter pulled the thin cotton sheet over her mother's face with hands that would not stop trembling. The room felt too quiet, too wide, like the walls had stepped back to avoid what had just happened. The body beneath the sheet was already cold, cold in a way that didn't belong to sleep. She stood there, 10 years old, barefoot on a splintered wooden floor, listening. Nothing, no breath, no cough, no soft whisper of prayer. Only her little sister. 6-year-old Millie sat curled in the corner, rocking back and forth, clutching a faded rag doll with crooked stitching and one missing button eye. "Wake up, Mama," she whispered again and again, like if she said it enough times the world would rewind. "Wake up, wake up." Eliza crossed the room, her chest tight as if something had wrapped around her ribs and pulled hard. She knelt and grabbed Millie's arms. "She ain't waking up," she said, her voice breaking before she could stop it. She swallowed it down. "We got to go now," Millie jerked away. "No, I ain't leaving her." "I ain't." She dug her bare heels into the floorboards and screamed, a sound so sharp it felt like it split the air in two. Eliza didn't have time to be gentle. She lifted Millie, light as a bundle of sticks and heavy as the whole world, and carried her toward the door. "Let me go, I hate you," Millie sobbed, biting Eliza's shoulder hard enough to sting. "That's fine," Eliza said through her teeth. "Hate me and walk." Millie went limp, not because she agreed, but because she'd run out of fight. Eliza set her down outside in the burning sunlight. The dirt road shimmered with heat. Their house behind them looked smaller already. Empty. Eliza knelt and wiped Millie's face with the hem of her dress. "Listen to me, we ain't got food. We ain't got water, ain't nobody coming. If we stay, we die there, you hear me?" Millie's chin trembled. "Where we going?" Eliza pointed down the road toward a thin curl of smoke she'd seen earlier from the window while counting the seconds between their mother's last breaths. "Smoke meant fire, fire meant life, maybe's that way. What if they're mean?" Millie whispered. "Then we keep walking." They walked. The dirt cut into their feet, dust clung to their ankles. Eliza carried a flour sack with 2 dresses, a tin cup, and her mother's leather-bound journal, nothing else. The cupboards had been empty. The coin jar under the bed held nothing but dust. Millie lasted 20 minutes before she started stumbling. "I can't, Lisa, my feet." Eliza looked down at the blisters forming on her sister's soles, then at her own. "Same." She turned her back. "Climb on." Millie wrapped her arms around Eliza's neck. Eliza stood, legs shaking, spine screaming, and took another step. And another and another. "Is Mama in heaven?" Millie asked softly against her shoulder. "Yeah." "Is Papa there too?" "Yeah." "Are they together?" "Yeah, baby." "They're together." Eliza didn't know if any of that was true, but she knew Millie needed it to be. The ranch appeared like a mirage, 1 second nothing but heat and flat land, the next a solid house, a barn, horses in a corral, and a black dog sleeping by the porch. Eliza stopped. Millie slid down, clutching her hand so tight it hurt. The front door opened. A tall man stepped out. Broad shoulders, dark hair too long, a scar running along his right hand. His eyes moved over them slowly, dusty feet, thin dresses, the flour sack. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, he just looked. Eliza's heart pounded so loud she thought he might hear it. "Please," she said, hating the crack in her voice. "My sister needs water." The man's jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to Millie's shaking hands. "Both of you do," he said finally. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across wood. "Come inside." Eliza didn't move. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added. "But that little one's about to fall over. You want to argue or you want water?" Eliza stepped forward. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and coffee. The man filled a cup and handed it to Millie. "Slow," he warned. Millie didn't listen. Water ran down her chin. The man refilled it without a word. He set bread and dried meat on the table. "Eat." Millie tore into it like a starving animal. Eliza forced herself to chew slow, even though her stomach cramped and growled. After a long silence, the man asked, "Where's your folks?" "Dead," Eliza said. "Both." He went still. "Papa died in the Silver Ridge collapse last winter. Mama stopped breathing this morning." "This morning?" His voice softened without meaning to. "Yes, sir. And you carried her here. There wasn't nobody else." The man leaned against the counter, staring at nothing for a moment. "What's your name?" "Eliza Me Carter. This is Millie." He nodded once. "I'm Daniel Harper." Millie looked up, cheeks full. "Can we sleep here tonight? Just tonight. We won't break nothing." Daniel looked at her for a long time. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, recognition. "You can stay," he said quietly. Relief hit Eliza so hard her knees almost buckled. He led them down the hallway to a small bedroom. On the trunk sat a pair of tiny boots. On the door frame were pencil marks, heights, dates. The highest one ended at age 4, no age 5. Eliza looked back at Daniel. His face had gone blank in that way people's faces do when they're holding back something too big. Get some rest, he said and closed the door. Millie picked up the tiny boots. They're real small. Put 'em back, Eliza whispered. Millie placed them carefully where they'd been. He's sad, Millie said. Yeah, like us. Yeah, Millie curled under the quilt and clutched her doll. Mama told me something last night, she murmured. Eliza's heart squeezed. What? She said, find someone kind. She made me say it 3 times. Eliza sat down hard on the edge of the bed. Their mother had said the same thing to her, find someone kind. Millie drifted to sleep. Eliza lay beside her staring at the pencil marks on the door frame. Age 1, age 2, age 3, age 4, a life measured in inches, stopped. Somewhere in the hallway, a floorboard creaked. Daniel Harper was standing outside the door, listening, making sure. Eliza closed her eyes, and for the first time since morning, she let herself cry. Quiet, so quiet no one would hear. But inside, something else stirred. They had found someone kind, but would kindness be enough when the world came knocking? And it would. Morning came with the smell of coffee and something frying in a pan. For one confused second, Eliza thought she was back home. That her mother was in the kitchen humming off-key, burning biscuits again. That Millie was still asleep beside her and the world hadn't cracked open. Then she saw the faded quilt. The tiny boots on the trunk, not home, Daniel Harper's house. She turned to wake Millie, but Millie wasn't there. Eliza shot upright, heart hammering. She rushed down the hall, bare feet slapping against wood, and stopped short in the kitchen doorway. Millie sat at the table swinging her legs, talking non-stop. And Mama used to sing when she cooked, but she couldn't sing good ha-ha-ha, she sounded like a crow sometimes, but we never told her 'cause it would hurt her feelings. Daniel stood at the stove, flipping eggs with careful precision. Sounds like she tried hard, he said. She tried the hardest, Millie replied proudly. She just got sick, that ain't her fault. No, Daniel said quietly, it ain't. Eliza stayed in the doorway a moment watching. 3 plates were set out, 3, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel noticed her. You're up, sit, eat before it gets cold, she hesitated. You ain't gotta run today, he added, not unkindly. Nobody's chasing you, not yet. Eliza sat. Millie pointed toward a wooden high chair in the corner. Did you make that? Daniel's hand froze midair. Yes, he said after a beat. For your little girl, Eliza's chest tightened. Daniel set the pan down slowly. For my daughter Rose. Where is she? Millie asked softly. Daniel didn't answer at first. He stared at the high chair like it might answer for him. She passed, he said finally. 3 winters ago. Millie slid off her chair and patted over, running her small fingers over the carved flowers on the tray. These are pretty. She liked wildflowers, Daniel said, voice rough. Used to bring 'em home crushed in her fists like treasure. Millie touched the carving gently. I think she knows you miss her. Mamas always know. Daniel turned his back for a second, cleared his throat. Eat your eggs before they get cold. They did. After breakfast, silence settled heavy between them. Eliza wiped her hands on her dress. What happens now? Daniel leaned back in his chair. I ride into town. Eliza's stomach dropped. Why? Because folks saw you 2 walking down the East Road yesterday. Mrs. Bellamy at the Mercantile don't miss much. If word spreads that a single man took in 2 orphan girls, he exhaled sharply. Territory's got opinions. What kind of opinions? Eliza asked. The kind that end with officials at my door and you in an orphan house in Cheyenne. Millie's fork clattered. I ain't going to no orphan house, she cried. Daniel's voice hardened. Nobody's going anywhere. Eliza met his eyes. You don't know that. He held her gaze, something steady there, unmoving. I won't let it happen, he said. How? She demanded. You ain't kin, you ain't married. People talk. Daniel didn't answer right away. I'll find out what the law says, he said finally. Better to hear it from me than from someone with a badge and a bad mood. He stood, buckled on his gun belt, grabbed his hat. You stay inside while I'm gone. Don't answer the door. Don't open it for nobody. You hear me? Yes, sir, Eliza said. He paused at the doorway. Why are you doing this? She asked. He looked past her toward the high chair. Because the last time someone needed me, he said quietly, I was too late. Then he stepped out. Eliza watched from the window as he rode off, dust rising behind him. Millie sat on the floor by the high chair whispering to it. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked. "Telling Rose about us so she knows we're nice." Eliza swallowed hard. Hours crawled by. Eliza read from their mother's journal, memorizing remedies, holding onto the ink like it might hold on to her. Around noon, a buggy appeared on the road, not Daniel. "Eliza," Millie whispered, voice small, "somebody's coming." Eliza's pulse pounded in her ears. Back room now. They hid in the bedroom, door closed, boots on the porch, a knock. Then a woman's voice. "Daniel Harper, I know you're in there." Silence. Another knock, louder. "It's Clara Whitmore. I run the mercantile, and before you ignore me, I brought fried chicken." Millie's eyes widened. Eliza pressed her ear to the door. "I ain't here to make trouble," the woman continued. "But the whole town's buzzing like a kicked beehive. If you think I'm standing in this heat holding a basket this heavy for my own health, you're mistaken." Millie whispered. "She said chicken." Eliza hesitated. Something in the woman's voice wasn't sharp. It was firm, warm, like someone who'd made up her mind and wouldn't be budged. Eliza stepped into the hallway and called through the door, "How do we know you ain't lying?" A pause. Then a soft laugh. "Sweetheart, if I was lying, I'd have come up with something better than fried chicken and peach jam." Eliza made a decision. She opened the door. The woman on the porch was tall, with dark hair pinned back and eyes that had seen too much nonsense to tolerate more. She looked at Eliza and something in her face shifted. "Lord above," she murmured. "You're just a baby." "I'm 10, Eliza said stiffly. "I know what 10 looks like," the woman replied gently. "And you look like you've been carrying the weight of 50. She held up the basket. "May I?" Eliza stepped aside. The smell of fried chicken filled the kitchen. Millie appeared instantly. "Is that real chicken?" she asked, hopeful and suspicious all at once. "Real as it gets," the woman smiled. "Sit." They ate. Clara watched without pity, just attention. "Daniel rode into town 3 hours ago," Clara said casually. "Straight to the courthouse." Eliza froze. "Is that bad?" "It means he's trying." The word felt fragile. Clara's expression grew serious. "Judge Samuel Caldwell runs the county office. He's strict, lost his own daughter years back. That kind of grief can make a man hard about custody matters." Eliza's appetite vanished. "What does that mean?" "It means if he thinks this arrangement ain't proper, he can take you." The front door burst open. Daniel stood there, hat in hand, face tight as a storm cloud. He stopped when he saw Clara. "Clara Whitmore," he muttered, "you move fast." "Faster than gossip," she replied. "Now sit down and tell me what happened." Daniel dropped into a chair. "Judge knows," he said. "Someone told him before I could. He's coming out here." "Tomorrow," Millie whimpered. "With papers," Daniel added. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. What kind of papers? The kind that take children away. Silence swallowed the room whole. Millie slid off her chair and walked to Daniel. "You promised," she said, voice trembling. "You said nobody's going anywhere." Daniel looked at her, and for a second, for just 1 second, the strong, silent man cracked. "I know what I said," he whispered. Eliza stepped forward. "Then keep it." Daniel looked at Clara. Something passed between them, a thought, a risk. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't." "I wasn't, you were." Eliza's heart pounded. "Don't what?" she asked. Clara exhaled slowly. "Because once you say it," she said quietly to Daniel, "there ain't no unsaying it." Daniel ran a hand over his face. "It's insane," he muttered. "Yes," Clara agreed softly, "it is." Millie looked between them. "What's insane?" Daniel lifted his gaze to Clara. "What if," he said carefully, "there was a wife in this house before morning?" Silence exploded. Eliza stopped breathing. Clara's fingers tightened on the table. "That's not something you ask lightly," she said. "I ain't asking lightly." Clara's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking if you'd stand with me for them." Clara looked at Millie, at Eliza. At the high chair in the corner, she laughed once, soft, disbelieving. "Well," she whispered, "I was wondering when you'd finally say something foolish." Daniel blinked. "That a yes?" Clara met his eyes. "I'm saying yes," she said. And just like that, everything changed. But would a marriage made in desperation be enough to fool the law? Morning was coming, and so was the judge. The house felt different after Clara said yes, not louder, not brighter, just charged. Like the air before a thunderstorm. Daniel stood in the middle of the kitchen as if he'd just stepped off a cliff and hadn't yet checked whether there was ground beneath him. You're sure? He asked quietly. Clara raised an eyebrow. Daniel Harper, I do not say yes to things I ain't sure about. This ain't small. No, she agreed. It ain't. Millie tugged on Clara's skirt. Are you gonna be our mama now? The question hit the room soft and heavy all at once. Clara knelt so she was eye level with her. Her fingers brushed Millie's tangled curls back from her forehead. I don't know if anyone can replace your mama, she said gently, but I can stand beside you. I can cook and scold and listen and stay if you'll let me. Millie studied her like she was inspecting a horse for temperament. Can you make tall biscuits? She asked. Clara laughed, real, warm, surprised. I make the tallest biscuits in 3 counties. Millie nodded solemnly. Then okay. Eliza felt something in her chest loosen just a little. Daniel cleared his throat. Reverend Thomas lives 2 miles west. He don't ask many questions. Clara stood. Then we best not waste daylight. Eliza blinked. Tonight, Clara confirmed. Before sunrise brings that judge to your door. Daniel ran a hand over his jaw. Lord, too late for second thoughts, Clara said lightly, though her fingers trembled just a bit. They moved fast. Clara returned to town in her buggy to fetch a clean dress and the Reverend. Daniel shaved for the first time in weeks, nicking his jaw once because his hands wouldn't steady. Eliza washed Millie at the pump out back, scrubbing dirt from her ankles and braiding her hair with careful fingers. Are you scared? Millie asked. A little, me too. But the good kind, Eliza whispered, like jumping into cold water. Millie grinned. Ha ha ha, yeah, cold at first, then not. The sun dipped low, turning the sky copper and rose. Clara returned just before dark with Reverend Thomas riding behind her on a thin bay horse. He stepped down slow and steady, Bible tucked beneath his arm. I reckon this is the place, he said calmly. Daniel nodded. Appreciate you coming on short notice. I've married folks for less urgent reasons, the Reverend replied. They gathered in the front room, no flowers, no music, just 4 chairs pushed aside and the scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Clara stood across from Daniel, wearing a dark blue dress Eliza hadn't seen before. Simple, clean, strong, Reverend Thomas opened his Bible. Marriage is not convenience, he began. It is covenant. Whether born of love, duty, or necessity, it binds the same. Millie whispered loudly, What's covenant? A promise you don't break, Eliza murmured back. The Reverend looked at Daniel. Do you take Clara Whitmore to be your wife? To stand with her, protect her, and honor her from this day forward. Daniel looked at Clara, really looked at her. I do. His voice didn't shake. The Reverend turned to Clara. Do you take Daniel Harper to be your husband? To stand with him, support him, and build whatever life comes next. Clara lifted her chin. I do. Daniel slid a simple gold band onto her finger. Clara placed one on his scarred hand without hesitation, her touch gentle over the rough skin. By the authority vested in me, Reverend Thomas said, I pronounce you husband and wife. He paused. You may seal it. Daniel hesitated only a heartbeat before leaning forward. The kiss was brief, not passionate, not desperate. But certain. Millie clapped. You're married, for real, Clara smiled. The Reverend signed the certificate at the kitchen table and handed it to Daniel. Keep copies, he advised. Law respects paper more than feelings. After he left, silence settled again. Daniel and Clara stood awkwardly on the porch. Eliza watched from the doorway. Guess we're married, Daniel said quietly. Guess we are, Clara replied. Neither moved for a moment, then Clara laughed softly. Well, I suppose married people do dishes. Daniel smiled, an actual smile, small, surprised, like he'd forgotten how. Inside, Millie curled up in Rose's old bed, hugging her doll. Eliza, yeah, I think Mama sent her, Eliza swallowed. Maybe she did. Later that night, Eliza stood at the window watching Clara and Daniel sit side by side on the porch steps. Not touching, just close, talking low, learning the shape of each other's silence. For the first time since the mind collapsed, for the first time since Mama stopped breathing, Eliza felt safe, but safety felt fragile because dawn was coming. And so was Judge Caldwell, and judges didn't care about kisses, they cared about proof. Would a piece of paper be enough, or would morning tear everything apart again? Dawn came pale and quiet, too quiet. Eliza woke before the sun fully crested the hills. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she heard Clara moving in the kitchen, steady footsteps, the soft clink of dishes, and the memory of last night rushed back in a wave. Married. They were married. Millie was still asleep, curled around her rag doll like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Eliza brushed a curl from her sister's forehead. Big day, she whispered softly. Millie mumbled tall biscuits and rolled over. Eliza almost laughed, almost. In the kitchen, Clara already had coffee brewing and bread sliced. She tied her hair back neatly and changed into a simple morning dress with an apron that hadn't been there yesterday. You're up early, Clara said without turning. So are you, Clara gave a small smile. If a judge is coming to inspect my home, I suppose I ought to have one. My home. The words landed gently in Eliza's chest. Daniel came in from outside, boots dusty, jaw freshly shaved again though he'd done it the night before. They'll come from the east, he said. We'll see dust first. Millie stumbled in rubbing her eyes. Are they here? Not yet, Clara answered, sliding a plate in front of her. Eat. They sat together at the table, 4 plates, 4 cups. Daniel's hand rested near Millie's without touching her like he was guarding something precious. Eliza noticed, she noticed everything, then Daniel stiffened. Dust, he said quietly. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Clara untied her apron slowly, folded it, hung it neatly on the hook. Together, she said. Daniel nodded. Together, they stepped out onto the porch side by side. Eliza and Millie stood just behind them. 3 riders approached. Judge Samuel Caldwell rode in front, posture straight as a fence post, expression carved from stone. 2 men followed, one thin with spectacles, the other younger carrying a leather case. They dismounted with stiff precision. Judge Caldwell climbed the porch steps without smiling. Mr. Harper, he said coolly, I'm here regarding the 2 minor girls in your custody. Daniel didn't flinch. I figured. Caldwell's eyes shifted to Clara. And you are Clara Harper, she said evenly, his wife. A flicker, brief, controlled. You were Miss Whitmore yesterday, the judge replied. Yes, sir, and married last night. Yes, sir, the judge's eyebrow lifted slightly. Convenient timing. Clara met his gaze without blinking. Necessary timing. Silence stretched. Daniel stepped aside. You're welcome to come in. Inside, the kitchen was spotless, coffee fresh, breakfast dishes drying, evidence of life. Judge Caldwell examined everything slowly, the table, the high chair in the corner, the boots on the trunk down the hall. Marriage certificate, he requested. Daniel handed it over. Caldwell inspected it carefully, then passed it to the man with spectacles. Legitimate, the man muttered. The judge nodded once. I will speak with the girls privately. Daniel's jaw tightened. They don't need to be frightened. It's procedure. Clara touched Daniel's arm gently. Let them. Eliza felt Millie's small fingers wrap around hers. They were led into the sitting room. Judge Caldwell sat across from them. Up close, he didn't look cruel. He looked tired. Eliza Me Carter, he began. You're 10. Yes, sir. Tell me how you came here. Eliza told him. The mind collapsed, the coughing, the stillness of her mother's chest, the road, the smoke, the door. She didn't cry, she didn't falter, she told it plain. And Mr. Harper, the judge asked. He gave us water, Eliza said, when we hadn't had any. He gave us food, he gave us a bed. She hesitated. He gave us Rose's room. The judge's gaze sharpened. Rose, his daughter, Millie piped up softly. She liked wildflowers. Something flickered in the judge's face. And Mrs. Harper, he asked. She brought chicken, Millie said seriously, and she makes tall biscuits. The judge almost smiled. Eliza leaned forward. You want to know if this family is real, she asked, her voice steady though her heart was pounding loud enough to shake her ribs. Yes, it's only been a little while, she admitted, but it's more real than anything we've had since Mama got sick. Silence. Millie clutched her doll tight. My mama said find someone kind, she whispered. We found them. Please don't make us go. The room went still. Judge Caldwell looked at them for a long, long moment. Then he stood abruptly and walked out. Millie panicked. Did I say something wrong? No, Eliza breathed. You said everything right. In the kitchen, voices murmured low. Then the front door opened and closed. Boots crossed the porch. Time stretched. Finally, the judge returned. His eyes were slightly red. He stood in the center of the kitchen. These children, he said evenly, are in a stable and lawful home. The man with spectacles stiffened. Judge, I see no grounds for removal, Caldwell finished firmly. The words hit like thunder. Eliza's knees nearly buckled. Millie gasped, "We can stay." Daniel closed his eyes briefly like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater too long. "Yes," the judge said, "you can stay." Clara gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles whitened. Judge Caldwell turned to Daniel. "You've done right by them." He looked at Clara. "And you've taken on much." Clara's voice didn't waver. "I wanted to." The judge nodded slowly. "I won't trouble this household again." He stepped outside. The riders mounted and disappeared in a cloud of dust. The moment the road cleared, Millie burst into tears, loud, messy, relieved tears. Eliza grabbed her and held tight. Daniel crossed the room and lifted Millie into his arms, pressing her against his chest. "You're staying," he whispered. Clara turned away for just a second, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she faced them again, chin lifted. "It's just beginning," she said softly. Eliza looked around the kitchen, 4 cups. 4 plates, the high chair in the corner. "Find someone kind," they had. But just when safety finally felt real, a shadow appeared at the end of the road. One rider, alone, and watching the house like it belonged to him. Who was he? And why did Eliza's heart suddenly feel afraid again? The rider didn't rush. That was what made it worse. He sat tall in the saddle at the edge of the property, just beyond the fence line, studying the house like a man measuring lumber before deciding where to cut. Daniel saw him first. His body changed, not fear, recognition. Clara noticed the shift instantly. "You know him?" Daniel didn't answer right away. The rider finally dismounted, lean, weathered, mid-40s maybe. A thin scar slicing through his left eyebrow. His clothes were clean but worn, not a rancher, not quite a townsman. A drifter who'd learned how to look respectable when necessary. He walked toward the porch slow and deliberate. Eliza felt something cold slide down her spine. Millie gripped Daniel's shirt tighter. The man stopped at the bottom step. "This the Harper place?" he asked casually. "It is," Daniel replied, voice flat. The man's eyes shifted past him. To Eliza, to Millie, his lips curved slightly. "Name's Victor Carter." The world tilted. Carter. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Her father's name. Victor looked directly at her. "You must be Eliza Me." Her stomach dropped to her feet. "How do you know that?" she demanded. He gave a humorless chuckle. "Because I'm your father's brother." Silence exploded across the porch. Clara's hand found Eliza's shoulder instantly. Daniel stepped forward slightly, not aggressive. "Protective, you're lying," Eliza said before she could stop herself. Victor's eyes hardened just a touch. "Am I?" Millie whispered. "Lisa." Daniel's voice was low and steady. "You weren't at the funeral. I didn't hear about it in time." "It was in every newspaper from here to Nevada," Daniel replied calmly. Victor's jaw tightened. "I was working," he said shortly. "Making a living." "And now?" Clara asked evenly. "What brings you here now?" Victor reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. "A hearing," he said, 2 weeks from today. "Filed it this morning in town." Eliza's heart slammed against her ribs. "Hearing," she whispered. Victor nodded. "Blood relatives have first claim. I'm their closest living kin." Millie shook her head violently. "No." Daniel's voice went steel. "Judge Caldwell just left here." "I know," Victor said smoothly. "Spoke to him myself after. Marriage don't erase blood." Clara's fingers tightened on Eliza's shoulder. "Where were you," she asked quietly, "when their father died in that mine?" Victor didn't blink. "Nevada." "Where were you when their mother was coughing herself to death?" Silence. Victor's gaze flickered away for half a second. "I ain't here to argue history," he said finally. "I'm here to take what's mine." Eliza stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "We ain't things," she said, voice shaking but loud. Victor studied her like she was a horse at auction. "You're my brother's daughters. You didn't even know Mama's name," she shot back. That landed hard. Victor's jaw flexed. Clara spoke again, calm but cutting. "What exactly are you offering them, Mr. Carter?" "A real family," he replied. "Blood." Daniel's laugh was short and sharp. "Blood didn't carry Millie down that road when she couldn't walk." Victor's eyes flashed. "You think I don't care? They're my kin." "Kin shows up," Daniel said quietly. The words hung heavy. Victor climbed 1 step up the porch. Daniel blocked him immediately. "You ain't invited." Victor's gaze shifted back to Eliza. "You know what happens to orphan girls without family?" he asked softly. "Life ain't kind." Eliza's chest tightened. "We have family," Millie cried. "We have Clara and Daniel." Victor smiled thinly. "Paper family." Daniel's hands curled into fists. Clara stepped between them. "You said there's a hearing," she asked. "Yes, then we'll see you there." Victor's eyes slid to her wedding band. "Convenient marriage," he muttered. "Necessary," she replied evenly. He looked back at Eliza one last time. "You'll understand someday," he said. "Blood matters." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. Dust swallowed him, silence swallowed the porch. Millie burst into tears again. Eliza stood frozen. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until someone decided where they belonged. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a man bracing for another storm. "He won't take you," he said, but this time his voice didn't sound as certain. Clara straightened her shoulders. "We'll fight," she said simply. Eliza swallowed hard. Fight. She had walked miles barefoot. She had carried her sister. She had buried her mother with her own trembling hands. She could fight. But what if blood was stronger than love in the eyes of the law? And what if Uncle Victor wasn't just after them, but after something else entirely? Because as he rode away, he had smiled. And it wasn't the smile of a man who cared. It was the smile of a man who had a plan. That night, the house didn't feel safe anymore. It wasn't fear exactly. It was tension, tight, stretched thin as wire. Millie refused to sleep in Rose's room alone. She crawled into Eliza's bed, clutching Bertie so hard the dolls seemed strained. "He can't take us, right?" she whispered into the dark. Eliza swallowed. She wanted to say no so badly it hurt. "He won't," she said anyway. It felt different than before. Before, the danger had been faceless, just law and papers and strangers. Now it had a name, Victor Carter, blood. Eliza lay awake long after Millie's breathing evened out. She stared at the ceiling and replayed the look in Victor's eyes. He hadn't looked sad, he hadn't looked relieved, he had looked calculating. In the kitchen, she could hear Daniel and Clara talking in low voices. "He's never written," Daniel said quietly. "Never visited, not once." Clara replied, "What do you know about him?" Daniel exhaled. "Worked the mines for a while. Drifted, gambled some, not violent, far as I heard, but not steady either." "And now he wants custody," Clara murmured. Daniel didn't answer because they both knew. A single rancher with decent land, 2 orphan girls. An illegal claim. Victor didn't just want blood. He wanted leverage, maybe inheritance someday, maybe land, maybe control. The floor creaked. Eliza slipped from bed and padded down the hallway. Daniel and Clara fell silent when they saw her. "You should be asleep," Clara said gently. "I heard him," Eliza replied. "You think he wants the ranch?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "He can't have it," Millie's voice piped from behind her. She had followed, silent as a shadow. Daniel knelt so he was eye level with both of them. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "No matter what happens in that courtroom, you are not property, you are not bargaining chips. You hear me?" Eliza nodded. Millie nodded harder. Clara crouched beside them. "The hearing will look at 3 things," she explained calmly: stability, care, and best interest. "Blood," Eliza added bitterly. Clara met her gaze. "Blood matters, but it is not everything." Daniel stood slowly. "We'll need proof." "Proof of what?" Millie asked. "That this is your home," Clara answered. The next 2 weeks turned into work, not frantic, not panicked, purposeful. Daniel kept the ranch running smoother than ever. Fence lines repaired, barn cleaned, books balanced. Clara brought records from the mercantile showing steady income. She wrote letters from townsfolk willing to testify: Mrs. Bellamy, Doc Harris, even Reverend Thomas. Eliza helped without being asked. She kept Millie clean, fed, practicing her letters at the kitchen table so anyone watching would see a child thriving. She read from her mother's journal aloud in the evenings. Remedies, stories, knowledge. "Why do you keep reading that?" Daniel asked one night. "Because Mama said the mines took everything but what was in her head," Eliza replied softly, "and I ain't letting that go." Daniel looked at her differently after that. Like she wasn't just a child, like she was steel wrapped in skin. Victor didn't return during those 2 weeks. That made it worse. Because quiet men are the ones who move in shadows. The night before the hearing, Millie climbed into Clara's lap. "What if the judge says we gotta go?" she whispered. Clara held her tight. "Then we appeal." "What's that?" "It means we don't quit." Daniel stood by the window, staring into the dark. "I should have seen this coming," he muttered. "You can't predict every storm," Clara said. He turned to her. "I won't lose them." The words weren't loud, but they shook the room. Eliza stepped forward. "You ain't going to," she said firmly. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and something steadied in his expression. Morning came too fast. The courthouse in town felt colder than it should, high ceilings, wooden benches, windows that let in light but no warmth. Victor stood near the front already, dressed sharper than before. Clean coat, polished boots, he smiled when he saw them. Eliza's stomach twisted. Judge Caldwell presided. His face was unreadable. The clerk called the case. Victor stepped forward confidently. "I am their paternal uncle," he began, "blood kin, closest living relative." Clara squeezed Eliza's hand gently. Daniel's jaw was stone. Victor continued, "A rushed marriage does not erase family obligation. These girls deserve to be with their blood." Judge Caldwell turned to Daniel. "And your claim?" Daniel stood tall. "They walked to my house barefoot," he said simply. "I fed them, I sheltered them. I married my wife to ensure they had what the law requires. But I did not marry her for law. I married her because she chose them." Clara stepped forward next. "I was denied adoption once because I was unmarried," she said clearly. "Now I am married, I am capable, and I am willing." Victor smirked faintly. Judge Caldwell's eyes moved to Eliza. "You may speak." The courtroom seemed to shrink. Eliza stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "My uncle says blood matters," she said. "Maybe it does, but blood didn't bury my mama. Blood didn't carry my sister. Blood didn't open that door." She looked directly at Victor. "You didn't even know her favorite song." Victor stiffened. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she held them back. "I don't belong to a name," she said. "I belong where I am loved." The courtroom went silent. Millie sniffled loudly behind her. Judge Caldwell studied her for a long moment, then he leaned back slowly. "Blood is important," he said evenly. "But so is presence." Victor's confidence flickered. Judge Caldwell continued, "The court will consider not only kinship but consistency, care, and demonstrated stability." He glanced toward Daniel and Clara, then back to Victor. "This decision will not be made lightly." The gavel struck once. "Ruling tomorrow morning, tomorrow, one more night of not knowing." Victor's smile returned as he walked past them. "You should start packing," he whispered to Eliza. Her heart pounded because his confidence didn't look like bluff. It looked like someone who thought he had something else up his sleeve. What did he know, and what would tomorrow bring? That night felt longer than the 2 weeks before it. No one slept properly. Millie finally drifted off near midnight, curled against Clara like she had been doing it her whole life. Clara stayed awake, one hand resting in Millie's hair, staring at the ceiling. Daniel sat at the kitchen table in the dark, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Eliza found him there. "You should sleep," she said softly. He gave a small huff, tried. She stood beside him for a moment, then sat down across from him. "You think he knows something," she said. Daniel didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yeah, what? I don't know yet." That was the worst part. Victor hadn't argued loudly, he hadn't pushed hard, he'd smiled. Men who smile at the wrong times are dangerous. Morning came gray and heavy. The courthouse seemed even colder than the day before. Victor was already there again. This time he looked almost relaxed. Judge Caldwell entered precisely at 9. Everyone stood, the room settled. The judge cleared his throat. "I have reviewed the petitions and testimony," he began. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought she might faint. Victor folded his hands calmly in front of him. Judge Caldwell continued, "Mr. Carter does indeed have blood claim." Victor's lips twitched upward. "But," the judge said, pausing just long enough to twist the air tight, "blood claim does not override demonstrated welfare." Victor's smile faltered. Judge Caldwell looked directly at him. "Mr. Carter, during review of your petition, certain information came to light." Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Specifically," the judge continued evenly, "a gambling debt filed against your name 3 months ago in Nevada territory. Additionally, a lien on a mining claim currently in dispute." The courtroom murmured. Daniel's head snapped slightly toward Victor. Victor's calm cracked for the first time. "That has nothing to do with." "It has everything to do with stability," Judge Caldwell interrupted. Victor's hands clenched. Judge Caldwell continued, voice steady and sharp as a blade. "You sought custody 2 days after learning Mr. Harper's ranch sits on mineral-rich land recently surveyed by the Territorial Office." The words dropped like dynamite. Eliza felt the floor tilt. Mineral-rich. Daniel stiffened. Clara inhaled sharply. Victor stepped forward, anger flashing now. "That land belongs to Harper, not the girls." Should Mr. Harper pass without direct heirs, Caldwell replied coolly, guardianship could place certain interests into the care of their next of kin. Silence. Victor hadn't come for family, he had come for land, for leverage, for a future claim. Eliza's stomach churned. Victor looked around the courtroom, realizing the tide had turned. You can't prove intent, he snapped. I don't need to, Caldwell replied calmly. I need only determine best interest. He turned toward Daniel and Clara. These girls have been fed, housed, educated, and emotionally supported in this home. He looked at Eliza. You spoke clearly. Her throat tightened. Judge Caldwell raised the gavel. Petition for transfer of custody is denied. The strike echoed. Denied, denied, denied. Millie burst into tears again, loud, relieved, messy tears. Eliza felt her knees wobble, but this time from something overwhelming and bright. Daniel let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. Clara gripped his hand openly now. Victor stood frozen. For a moment, Eliza almost pitied him, almost, but then he looked at her. And the bitterness in his eyes burned away any sympathy. This ain't over, he muttered under his breath as he walked past, but his voice didn't carry power anymore, it carried defeat. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. Millie threw herself into Daniel's arms. We won, ha ha ha, we won, Daniel laughed, a real laugh, deep and disbelieving. Clara pulled Eliza into a tight embrace. You were brave, she whispered. Eliza finally let the tears fall, not quiet ones, not hidden, open ones for her mama, for the road, for the fear, for the relief. Back at the ranch that afternoon, the house felt different again, not fragile, solid. Earned, Daniel stood on the porch watching the horizon. He won't be back, Clara said gently. Daniel nodded. Not unless he wants trouble he can't afford. Millie was chasing the dog in the yard, laughing wildly. Eliza stood beside Daniel. You're really stuck with us now, she said. Daniel glanced down at her, one corner of his mouth lifting. Best thing that ever happened to me, she studied him. You don't regret it, not for a second. Inside, Clara was already kneading dough, tall biscuits. Eliza smiled softly. Find someone kind. They had, not by blood, not by accident, by choice. But as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, Eliza couldn't shake one last thought. Victor had lost the case, but men like him didn't disappear quietly, and somewhere beyond the hills he was riding away with nothing left to lose. And that made him dangerous in a whole new way. For a while it felt like peace, not loud peace, not dramatic, just the quiet kind that settles into walls and floors and makes a house breathe easier. Weeks passed, Victor didn't return. No riders at the fence, no folded papers, no smug smiles. Daniel worked the north pasture longer hours than usual, but he came home each night with less tension in his shoulders. Clara's laughter came easier. Millie grew bold enough to chase chickens without fear of being told to pack her things the next morning. And Eliza began to feel something new. Belonging. One afternoon, while Daniel and Millie were fixing a loose fence post, Clara found Eliza sitting on the porch with her mother's journal open in her lap. You've worn that book thin, Clara said gently. Eliza smiled faintly. It's about the only thing Mama left that don't feel like it's fading. Clara sat beside her. What are you reading today? Fever Remedy. Willow Bark Tea, Clara nodded thoughtfully. Doc Harris charges $2 a visit. Eliza looked up. $2 most folks around here don't have, Clara continued. You ever think about what you could do with what you know? Eliza blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Clara said carefully, knowledge like that can save lives. Eliza stared down at the page, save lives. Her mama couldn't save herself, but maybe someone else. That night Daniel mentioned something at supper. Surveyors came through town today, Clara paused mid-bite. About the land, Daniel nodded slowly, confirmed it. There's silver under the western ridge. The room went quiet, Millie's eyes widened. Like Papa's mind, Daniel met Eliza's gaze carefully. Not the same, he said firmly. And not for digging, not yet, Clara set down her fork. What does that mean for us? Daniel exhaled. It means people will come asking. Eliza's stomach tightened. As if summoned by the words, 3 days later a carriage appeared on the road, not dusty, not rough, polished. Inside sat a well-dressed man with slick hair and a smile too bright to be trusted. He introduced himself as Mr. Caldwell, no relation to the judge, a mining investor from Helena. Mr. Harper, he said smoothly, stepping onto the porch, I hear your land is promising. Daniel didn't invite him inside. I'm not selling. Mr. Caldwell chuckled lightly. Everyone sells eventually. Clara stepped beside Daniel. Not this time, she said evenly. The investor's gaze slid to Eliza and Millie standing behind them. Children are expensive, he remarked casually. Daniel's entire body went rigid. You're done here, he said quietly, the smile thinned. I'll make you a generous offer, the man insisted. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to leave. The carriage rolled away an hour later. But not before the message was clear. The silver beneath their land had turned their home into something valuable, something people wanted. That night, Daniel sat longer on the porch than usual. Eliza joined him. You're worried, she said. Yeah, about Victor, not just him. He looked out at the dark ridge in the distance. Silver brings men who don't ask kindly. Eliza thought about the mine collapse, about coughing, about dust. You won't let them dig it up, will you? She asked softly. Daniel looked at her, and for a moment she saw fire behind his calm. Over my dead body. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they scared her, because silver meant pressure. Pressure meant risk, and risk meant cracks. The next morning, Millie found something near the fence line, a scrap of paper tied to a broken branch. She brought it to Daniel. He unfolded it slowly. No signature. Just one sentence scrawled rough across the page. You can't protect it forever. Daniel's jaw tightened. Clara went pale. Eliza felt the fragile sense of safety fracture again. Victor had lost custody. But someone else had found motive. And now it wasn't just about two girls, it was about land, about wealth, about power. Daniel burned the note in the stove without a word, but the smoke that curled upward felt like a warning. Because if silver could bring strangers with offers, what would it bring when offers weren't enough? And what would Daniel do if protecting them meant fighting more than just words? The note burned quickly, but the words stayed. You can't protect it forever. Daniel didn't say who he thought had left it. He didn't need to. The investor from Helena had smiled too wide, Victor had lost too publicly, and silver under the western ridge had turned their quiet ranch into a target. The next few days moved carefully. Daniel rode the fence lines twice instead of once. He kept his rifle closer than usual. Clara locked the back door at dusk now, something she'd never done before. Millie noticed everything. Why does it feel like we're waiting? She asked one evening. Eliza forced a smile, because grown-ups worry too much. But she felt it too, waiting, like a storm building just beyond the hills. 3 nights later, the storm arrived. Not with thunder, with smoke. Eliza woke to the sharp smell of burning wood. At first she thought she was dreaming, then Millie coughed. Eliza, flames flickered orange across the bedroom wall, the barn. Eliza, Daniel's voice roared from the hallway. Get out now, chaos exploded. Clara rushed in, grabbing Millie and the rag doll in one motion. Daniel flung open the door. Heat hit them like a wall. The barn was ablaze, bright, furious, unnatural. Horses, Millie cried. Daniel was already running. No, Clara shouted, but he didn't stop. Eliza stood frozen for half a second, then ran after him. Stay back, Daniel barked. He kicked open the barn doors. Smoke poured out thick and choking. The horses screamed inside. Eliza grabbed a bucket from the pump, hands shaking violently. Clara dragged Millie toward the well, forming a frantic chain. Water, throw, water, throw. Daniel moved through smoke like a man possessed, cutting ropes, slapping the horses toward open pasture. One horse bolted free, then another. The roof cracked. Eliza back, Clara screamed. Daniel stumbled out just as part of the beam collapsed inward. Flames roared higher. They could only watch now. The barn burned fast, too fast. This wasn't lightning. This was an accident. Someone had said it. Millie sobbed into Clara's skirt. Eliza's lungs burned from smoke, but her chest burned worse from something else. Rage. When the fire finally died down to smoking ruins, dawn was creeping over the hills. Half the barn was gone, one stall completely collapsed, the western fence scorched. Daniel stood in the ash, face streaked black, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Clara stepped beside him. This wasn't random, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head once. No, Eliza walked toward the ruins slowly, and then she saw it near the back fence. Boot prints, not Daniel's, not theirs, fresh, heading toward the ridge. Daniel, she said quietly. He followed her gaze. The prince led west, toward the mineral survey stakes, his hands curled into fists. "They're escalating," Clara whispered. Millie tugged at Eliza's sleeve. "Are we going to lose everything?" Eliza knelt in front of her. "No," she said fiercely, but inside she wasn't sure, because this wasn't paper threats anymore. This was fire, and fire didn't ask permission. Daniel turned slowly. "They want to scare us," he said. "Make us sell." Clara looked at the burned beams. "Will it work?" Daniel's eyes hardened. No, that afternoon Daniel rode into town alone. Eliza watched him disappear down the road, her stomach tight. When he returned near sunset, his expression was colder than she'd ever seen it. "What happened?" Clara asked. "I filed a report with the sheriff." And Daniel's jaw flexed. "The sheriff says without witnesses it's just suspicion." Of course it was. Victor was gone, the investor was careful, and men with money knew how to avoid fingerprints. That night Daniel didn't sit on the porch, he sat at the table. Rifle across his lap. Millie fell asleep, clutching Bertie tighter than ever. Eliza lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. They had fought for family, they had fought for custody. Now they were fighting for land, and land fights were uglier. More dangerous, the silver under their soil had turned neighbors into hunters. And someone had just tested how far Daniel Harper would go to protect what was his. The question wasn't if they'd try again, it was when. And next time, would it just be a barn, or would it be the house? The next attempt came sooner than anyone expected. 3 nights after the barn burned, the dogs started barking. Not playful barking, not restless barking. The kind that rises sharp and frantic from the throat. Daniel was already awake. He didn't move suddenly. He listened, boots, more than one near the western fence. He stood slowly, lifted the rifle, and motioned Clara to stay back. "Eliza," he whispered. She was already sitting up. "Take Millie into the cellar, now." Millie stirred, confused and half asleep. "What's happening?" "Hide and be quiet," Eliza said, her voice steady though her heart was pounding so hard it felt painful. Clara led them down the narrow steps into the root cellar beneath the kitchen. It was cool, dark, too quiet. Millie clutched Bertie and pressed her face into Eliza's shoulder. Upstairs, voices low, laughing, a crash. Eliza's stomach twisted. "They're inside," Millie whispered, trembling. "SHH," Clara breathed. A chair scraped, a cupboard door slammed. "They're looking for something," Eliza realized. Papers, survey maps, anything proving value, then a gunshot. Millie flinched violently. Eliza wrapped her arms around her tighter. Upstairs, boots moved fast. Another crash. Daniel's voice cut through the noise like thunder. "Get off my land." Silence, then a scuffle. Eliza's nails dug into her palms. Another gunshot, then running footsteps. The back door slammed open, hooves pounding. They were fleeing. Clara waited 5 full breaths before moving. Daniel's boots crossed the kitchen floor. "Eliza," he called. They climbed the steps carefully. The kitchen was wrecked, drawers pulled out, maps torn, one cabinet door hanging loose. Daniel stood near the back door, rifle lowered, breathing hard. There was blood on his sleeve. Millie gasped. "You're hurt." "It's not mine," he said quickly. Relief flooded so hard Eliza nearly collapsed. "They were looking for the survey," Daniel said. Clara looked around at the mess. "They think if they destroy proof, they weaken your claim." Daniel nodded grimly. "They fired to scare." "Or to test," Clara replied. Eliza felt the truth settle heavy in her chest. This wasn't random vandalism. It was strategy. They were being pushed, slowly, measured. Daniel stepped outside to inspect the yard. 2 horses had been tied briefly near the fence, tracks everywhere. He returned inside. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Millie's face crumpled. "Why?" "Because men who want something bad enough don't quit after one try." Clara's jaw tightened. "We can't live like this," she said. Daniel met her gaze. "I know." That night the 4 of them sat at the kitchen table amid broken drawers and scattered papers. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Eliza did. "We can't just wait for the next fire," she said. Daniel looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" She swallowed. "Make it public." Clara tilted her head. "Public. Tell the town, tell the sheriff again. Tell everyone what's happening." Daniel shook his head slowly. "That invites more trouble." "It invites witnesses," Eliza countered. Silence. Clara studied her carefully. "She's right," Clara said softly. Daniel hesitated. Pride battled practicality in his eyes. Then he nodded once. "Fine. The next morning, Daniel rode into town with Clara beside him this time. They didn't whisper, they didn't hide it. They spoke openly at the mercantile, at the blacksmith, at the church steps. By afternoon, half the town knew someone had set the barn ablaze. Half the town knew armed men had entered the house. Men like the investor from Helena didn't like daylight. By evening, three neighbors rode out to the ranch, not investors, not officials, neighbors, Mr. Dalton from the next property north, old Mrs. Bellamy's son, even the sheriff came personally this time. They stood in the yard surveying the damage. This ain't right, Dalton muttered. Sheriff Harlan examined the tracks again. You're not alone in this, he said quietly to Daniel. And for the first time since the silver was confirmed, Daniel didn't look isolated, he looked backed. That night, two neighbors stayed, one near the ridge, one near the barn ruins, not guards exactly, but witnesses. Millie finally slept without clutching Bertie so tightly. Eliza lay awake again, but for different reasons. The danger hadn't vanished, but something had shifted. Fear in isolation is weakness. Fear shared becomes strength. Daniel sat on the porch again, rifle still within reach. Clara sat beside him. Their shoulders touched this time, not accidental. Not hesitant, intentional. You ever regret the silver? Clara asked quietly. Daniel stared at the dark ridge. No, why? He glanced toward the window where Eliza and Millie slept. Because it didn't create what's here, he said. It just revealed who's willing to fight for it. Clara leaned into him slightly. And are you? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Yes, but inside the darkness beyond the fence line, a rider paused briefly on the ridge, watching. Waiting because men who operate in shadows don't quit when the light turns on, they adjust. And the investor from Helena, he had not yet made his final move. The town's support changed things, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. For the first time since the silver was confirmed, Daniel didn't look like a lone rancher defending a secret. He looked like a man backed by witnesses. Two neighbors rotated night watch for a week. The sheriff rode by more often than necessary, and the investor from Helena, he stayed out of sight, which meant he was thinking. Men like that never stop thinking. One afternoon, as Clara was teaching Millie her letters at the table and Eliza was reading from the journal, a familiar carriage rolled up the road. Polished, controlled, arrogant, Mr. Caldwell stepped out alone this time, no smile, no charm. Afternoon, he said evenly. Daniel didn't invite him inside. What do you want? Caldwell clasped his hands behind his back. You've made this inconvenient. Daniel's eyes didn't blink. Good, Caldwell studied him. You think town gossip protects you. I think witnesses complicate arson, Daniel replied calmly. The investor's jaw twitched. Let's stop pretending, Caldwell said finally. You have silver, I have capital. I can make you wealthy, or I can make this exhausting. Clara stepped forward. Are you threatening us? Caldwell gave a thin smile. I'm offering inevitability. Eliza felt her stomach twist. Inevitability. Daniel's voice remained level. I'm not selling. Everyone sells. Daniel shook his head once. Not this. Caldwell's gaze slid toward the house. Toward the windows, toward the family inside. Sentiment, he murmured. Expensive weakness. Daniel's expression changed then. Not anger, not fear, resolve. You mistake me, he said quietly. They are not weakness. Silence stretched between them. Caldwell finally sighed. You're costing yourself a fortune. Daniel didn't flinch. Maybe. Caldwell turned to leave, but before stepping into the carriage, he paused. There's a territorial mining board, he said casually. They can claim land for development if it serves public interest. Clara's breath caught. Daniel's eyes hardened. You'd push that, Caldwell gave a small shrug. If persuasion fails. The carriage rolled away again, and this time the threat felt official. That night Daniel sat with the sheriff and two neighbors at the kitchen table. They can't just take it, Millie whispered from the hallway. Eliza pulled her back gently. They can try. The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. The mining board can petition, he admitted, but they need evidence the land is suitable and unused. Daniel looked toward the burned barn. Unused, he repeated. Clara's mind moved fast. What if it isn't? The men turned to her. What if we make it clear this land is active agricultural property, expand the west pasture, mark improvements? Show productivity. Daniel's eyes lit slightly. If it's operational ranch land, seizure becomes harder. Sheriff Harlan nodded slowly. They'd need stronger cause. Caldwell had money, but Daniel had land and now a plan. The next weeks turned into relentless work. Daniel and the neighbors rebuilt the barn stronger than before. Eliza helped Clara expand the vegetable plots westward. Millie carried seeds like treasure. Fences went up, markers were placed. Livestock records documented carefully. Every inch of the western ridge was claimed visibly as ranch use. No empty land, no idle space, no excuse. Eliza worked until her hands blistered, not because she had to. Because she wanted to, because this land was more than soil now. It was fought for, chosen, protected. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel stood on the ridge looking out over the expanded pasture. Clara joined him. "You're not tired?" she asked softly. "I am," he admitted. "Then why do you look calmer?" He glanced toward the house where Eliza and Millie were chasing the dog. "Because now we're not just defending," he said. "We're building," Clara smiled faintly. "That's harder to tear down." But down in Helena, Caldwell received word of the land improvements, and instead of anger, he smiled. Because he had been waiting for them to invest more. Waiting for the value to rise, waiting for the stakes to grow. And now the board meeting was scheduled 3 weeks from now, not for custody, not for persuasion, for acquisition. The fight wasn't about fire anymore. It wasn't about threats in the dark. It was about power in daylight, and daylight battles are often the most dangerous of all. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, official seal, territorial crest. No dust on the envelope, it had been delivered carefully. Clara opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel stood behind her, arms folded. Eliza watched every flicker of her expression. Millie watched Clara's hands. Clara read silently first, then out loud. The Territorial Mining Board will convene to determine whether the western ridge of Harper Ranch qualifies for public mineral development under statutory authority. Millie blinked. "What does that mean?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "It means they're trying to take it." The room felt smaller. Clara continued reading. "Attendance and defense presentation strongly advised. Defense presentation." Like they were on trial again, only this time it wasn't about family, it was about land, and land had no tears to soften judges. Sheriff Harlan came by that afternoon. "They'll argue public interest," he said, hat in hand. "Jobs. Development, economic growth," Daniel exhaled slowly. "And what do we argue?" Sheriff looked toward the ridge. "That it's active ranch land, that seizure would harm established agricultural productivity." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "Then we show them," and so they prepared again. But this time, preparation wasn't about emotion, it was about evidence. Daniel gathered livestock records, crop yields, sales receipts. Clara documented market transactions from the mercantiles showing ranch supply-demand tied to their operation. Eliza did something unexpected. She brought out her mother's journal. Clara looked confused. "Why that?" Eliza's voice was quiet but steady. "Because if they dig that ridge, they'll bring men, dust, collapse." Daniel froze. The mind collapsed, the coughing, the lung sickness. Silver had taken her father. Silver had taken her mother slowly. She swallowed hard. "I know what mining does," she said, "and so do other families." Clara understood instantly. "We gather testimony." Within days, word spread quietly. Men who had worked the mines, widows. Families who had buried fathers and sons. They agreed to speak, not against progress, but against reckless expansion into settled land. 3 weeks passed fast. The board meeting was held in Helena, bigger building, colder room. Long polished table, 3 board members seated like kings. Caldwell sat near the front, composed, confident. Daniel wore his cleanest shirt. Clara stood tall beside him. Eliza insisted on coming, Millie too, they would not be hidden. Caldwell spoke first. He presented surveys, economic projections, revenue numbers that made the room murmur with approval. "Public interest," he repeated smoothly. "Development benefits all." Daniel stood next. He didn't speak loudly, he didn't speak fast, he spoke plainly. "This land feeds cattle, feeds families, supports trade, it is not idle." He presented documents, receipts, records, the board listened. But numbers against numbers rarely sway power. Then Clara stepped forward. She presented affidavits from townsfolk, local economic reliance on ranch stability, community risk if land was destabilized. The board members leaned back, weighing. Then Eliza stepped forward. Daniel hadn't planned that, but he didn't stop her. My father died in a mine collapse, she said clearly. The room shifted. My mother died coughing from the dust he brought home. Silence deepened. You talk about public good, she continued, but you don't live where the dust settles. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Eliza met his gaze directly. You see silver. We see graves. The words landed heavy, not dramatic, just honest. A widowed miner's wife stepped forward next. Then another. Testimonies followed, not angry, not theatrical, steady, human. By the end, the boardroom felt different. Caldwell spoke again, pushing economic necessity, but the certainty in his voice had thinned. The chairman of the board finally spoke. Seizure under public interest requires overwhelming benefit and minimal harm. He looked at the documents. At the testimonies, at the children standing behind Daniel. Given the active agricultural status and potential health risks presented, a pause long enough to stretch breath thin. The petition for acquisition is denied, denied again. Caldwell didn't react outwardly, but his eyes had gone cold, not defeated, calculating. As the meeting adjourned, he approached Daniel privately. You've delayed it, he said quietly. Daniel didn't flinch. Or ended it, Caldwell's faint smile returned. There are always other angles. He walked away. Eliza felt it. The war had shifted. Again, they had won the board, they had held the land, but men who chase wealth do not retreat quietly. They pivot. Back home that evening. The ridge looked different, not threatened, protected, hard-earned. Millie twirled in the grass, laughing. Clara leaned against Daniel's shoulder openly now. No hesitation, no distance. Eliza stood looking west. They had defended family, they had defended land, but something about Caldwell's final words lingered. Other angles. What angle was left, and how far would a man go when money stopped being enough? For 2 months nothing happened. No letters. No riders, no threats tied to fence posts. It almost felt like victory had settled into permanence. Almost. Daniel didn't trust almost. He kept watch, but not obsessively. The barn stood rebuilt and stronger. The western pasture thrived. Calves were born healthy, crops held steady. Clara's mercantile business quietly benefited from the renewed ranch stability. People preferred trading with someone who stood her ground. Eliza began studying more seriously from her mother's journal. She shadowed Doc Harris when he allowed it, learned about herbs, stitching, fevers. Millie learned to ride properly. Life began to feel full. Then came the telegram, short, blunt. Delivered by a boy who wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes. Investment group has purchased surrounding parcels west and north of Harper Ranch, development proceeding immediately. Daniel read it twice. Clara went pale. Eliza felt something cold bloom in her chest. Surrounding parcels. They couldn't take the Harper land directly, so they would choke it. Within a week, survey markers appeared on neighboring properties. Within 2 weeks, men with tools began clearing brush along the ridge line, not on Harper land, but close enough to see from the porch. Caldwell hadn't retreated, he had expanded. They're boxing us in, Clara said quietly. Daniel nodded. If they build roads and shafts around us, we're isolated. Millie looked confused. But they can't dig our part. No, Daniel replied, but they can make living here unbearable. Noise, dust, traffic, pressure. Eliza stood on the porch watching the first drilling tower rise beyond the north fence. Her chest tightened. The sound of metal striking rock carried across the hills like distant thunder. That night the dust returned, not thick, not choking, but enough to remind her, her mother's coughing, the hollow look in her eyes. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, fists clenched. They're doing it anyway, she whispered. Daniel didn't deny it. Clara spoke carefully. We can't control what they do on land they own. But it'll spread, Eliza insisted. It always spreads. Daniel looked at her differently. What are you thinking? She swallowed. If they're digging, they'll need access roads. Daniel nodded slowly. They'll try to route supply through the fastest terrain, which meant across Harper land. Within days, a representative from Caldwell's company arrived with formal request. Access easement, temporary road construction across the western edge. Daniel read the paper calmly, then tore it in half. No, the representative smiled thinly. You may want to reconsider. Denial complicates your own trade routes. Daniel didn't blink. I'll haul my cattle twice the distance before I open that gate. The man's smile faded. That night a new sound echoed from beyond the ridge, blasting. Controlled detonations, not on their land, but close enough to shake windows. Millie cried at the first explosion. Eliza didn't. She went outside. She stood in the dust, drifting faintly across the field, and something in her hardened. They couldn't win by fighting alone. They had won custody. They had won the board, but Caldwell had money, and money builds momentum. Eliza, Clara called softly from the porch. She didn't turn. They'll push until it hurts, Eliza said. Daniel joined her outside. It already does, she looked at him then. Then we make it hurt for them. Daniel studied her carefully. That's a dangerous road, she nodded. So is silence. The next morning, Eliza rode into town with Clara. Not to complain, to organize, she spoke to widows again, to ranchers uneasy about blasting near their grazing fields, to shopkeepers worried about road congestion. Within a week, petitions circulated. Within 2 weeks, a coalition formed, not just Harper Ranch, multiple landowners concerned about expansion impact. Sheriff Harlan quietly supported them. Doc Harris signed publicly. Even Reverend Thomas gave statement. Caldwell noticed. Of course he did. His next move came fast. An official complaint filed against Harper Ranch. Alleged water diversion affecting neighboring mining operations. False, but legal. Another hearing, another battle. This time not for land ownership, for compliance. Caldwell wasn't trying to seize. He was trying to drain money, energy, time. Daniel sat at the table with the complaint in his hands. He wants us exhausted, Clara said quietly. Eliza stood behind them. He wants us alone, she corrected. Daniel looked up, and for the first time since this began, he smiled. Not because it was easy, but because he saw it clearly now. We're not alone, he said. Outside, blasting thundered again across the ridge, but this time the sound didn't feel like inevitability. It felt like escalation. And escalation cuts both ways. Caldwell had moved to surround, to pressure, to isolate, but he had underestimated one thing: family isn't just blood, it's community. And community, when stirred, can become something even wealth struggles to control. The question wasn't whether Caldwell would escalate again. He would. The question was, would he realize too late that he wasn't fighting one ranch anymore? For the water complaint hearing was set fast, too fast. Caldwell wasn't dragging this out anymore. He was accelerating. The accusation was simple on paper. Harper Ranch had allegedly redirected a stream feeding into mining operations north of the ridge, reducing flow and causing operational delay. Daniel read the complaint twice, then a third time. It's a lie, Millie said bluntly. Yes, Clara agreed, but lies backed by paperwork require defense. Eliza stood by the window, watching dust drift faintly from the northern blasts. He wants us distracted, she said quietly. Daniel nodded, and drained. This hearing wouldn't decide ownership, it would decide fines, restrictions, costs. Enough pressure and even stubborn men fold, but something had shifted. The coalition Eliza helped build was no longer whispers in the mercantile. It had weight. 3 neighboring ranchers filed statements that the stream had flowed naturally for years. Doc Harris provided land surveys predating Caldwell's purchase. Sheriff Harlan testified the water channel had not been altered. The hearing room was fuller this time. Not because of spectacle, because of solidarity. Caldwell sat poised as ever, clean, confident. He presented maps showing reduced downstream flow, charts, numbers, expert testimony from a mining engineer claiming unnatural obstruction. Daniel stood calmly when it was his turn. We've done no diversion, he said simply. Clara followed with documented stream surveys signed months before any mining expansion. Then something unexpected happened. Old Mr. Dalton stood. No one had asked him to speak. He wasn't on the formal list, but the chairman allowed it. I've grazed North Pasture 40 years, Dalton said steadily. That stream dips low every late summer, always has. Mining blasting shifts sediment, that's what's choking your flow. Not this ranch, murmurs followed. Caldwell's jaw flexed. Then Doc Harris stepped forward, then Mrs. Bellamy's son. One by one, the narrative shifted. The chairman of the board leaned back thoughtfully. Mr. Caldwell, he said, it appears natural seasonal variation and nearby industrial disturbance may be contributing factors. Caldwell's composure thinned just a fraction. Mining operations are within legal bounds, he replied sharply. And so is ranching, the chairman returned calmly. After a long pause, the complaint is dismissed pending further independent environmental review. Dismissed again. Not decisively crushed, but denied. Outside the building, Caldwell approached Daniel one more time. You're building resistance, he said quietly. Daniel didn't deny it. You forced our hand. Caldwell's eyes shifted briefly to Eliza. You think community will hold when money starts flowing north? He asked. Clara stepped forward. Maybe not all of them, she said calmly, but enough. Caldwell studied her, then something unexpected happened. He didn't threaten. He didn't smirk, he exhaled slowly. You could have sold early, he said. Daniel nodded. Yes. Caldwell glanced toward the distant ridge visible beyond town rooftops. It would have been easier. Daniel's answer came steady. Easy isn't always right. Silence stretched. Then Caldwell turned and walked away without another word. Back at the ranch that evening, the blasting still echoed faintly, the dust still drifted, the towers still rose beyond neighboring fences. But something had changed. The noise didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt contested. Millie sat at the table drawing with charcoal. Eliza was copying medicinal notes into a new ledger Clara had given her. Daniel leaned in the doorway watching them. You ever think about what happens when this is done? Clara asked softly. Daniel looked out at the pasture. It won't ever be fully done. Clara smiled faintly. No, she agreed. But it's ours. Eliza glanced up. The house wasn't just standing anymore. It was rooted, fought for, rebuilt, chosen. Later that night, Eliza stepped outside alone. The ridge glowed faintly under moonlight. Drilling towers silhouetted against the sky like skeletal giants. She didn't feel small, she felt aware. Caldwell had escalated with fire, with law, with pressure, and each time they had answered, not alone, not in silence, together. Behind her, the porch boards creaked. Daniel joined her. You're thinking hard, he said. Yes. About what? She looked west. About how silver brought us here, she said softly, but it didn't break us. Daniel studied her face. It didn't, she hesitated. Do you ever wish it had never been found? He thought long before answering. No, why? Because without it, he said quietly, we'd never know what we're capable of. The blasting echoed once more in the distance. But it sounded different now, not like a threat, like a reminder. This land would always hold something beneath it. Silver, history, loss, strength, and above it, a family built not by blood alone, but by choice. And choice, once defended, is harder to mine than any metal buried in the ground. Yet beyond the ridge, investors still calculated, expansion still crept, and ambition never sleeps, but neither now did resolve. Winter came early that year. Snow rolled over the ridge in heavy sheets, softening the sharp lines of drilling towers and muting the sound of distant blasts. The mines slowed, not stopped, but slowed, and for the first time in months, the Harper Ranch felt quiet. Not fragile quiet, earned quiet. Daniel reinforced the barn roof before the first hard freeze. Clara stocked flour and sugar in barrels near the cellar steps. Eliza dried herbs carefully and labeled them in her growing ledger. Millie practiced writing even in the cold, breath puffing white in the air as she laughed. Life was still work, but it was steady. One evening, as snow drifted sideways against the windows, there was a knock at the door, not frantic, not aggressive. Measured, Daniel opened it cautiously. Mr. Caldwell stood there alone, no carriage, no escort, snow clung to his coat. For the first time since Eliza had known his name, he didn't look untouchable, he looked tired. May I come in? He asked. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. Clara's shoulders tensed, but she didn't speak. Caldwell removed his gloves slowly, glancing around the kitchen. It looked lived in, warm, occupied. You've made this expensive, he said calmly. Daniel folded his arms. You made it necessary. Caldwell gave a faint, humorless smile. Investors are losing patience. Expansion north is profitable. Expansion west is complicated. Good, Daniel replied. Caldwell studied Eliza for a moment. You understand I wasn't trying to harm you personally. Eliza met his gaze. You burned our barn. He didn't deny it. I escalated pressure, he said quietly. There's a difference, Clara's voice cut sharp. Not to children. Silence. Snow tapped against the window. Caldwell exhaled slowly. I miscalculated, he admitted. The words landed heavy. Daniel didn't respond. I thought resistance would fracture, Caldwell continued. It strengthened. He looked toward the western ridge beyond the window. There is still silver there, Daniel nodded once. I know, and you'll never mine it. No, Caldwell's gaze returned to him. You'd leave wealth in the ground, Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Yes, silence stretched long and quiet. Then Caldwell did something none of them expected. He removed a folded document from his coat. A revised boundary proposal, he said. No easement, no acquisition, formal agreement recognizing Harper Ranch as protected agricultural property. Clara blinked. Daniel didn't move. In exchange, he asked carefully. No interference, Caldwell replied. You don't rally the town against northern operations. We leave your ridge untouched. Eliza's heart pounded. A truce. Daniel studied the paper but didn't take it yet. And why would I trust you? Caldwell met his eyes evenly. Because expansion north is sufficient and because fighting you has become inefficient. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't kindness. It was calculation shifting course. Clara stepped closer. If we sign, you guarantee no blasting near our fence lines. Yes, no water disputes. Yes, no access requests. Yes, Daniel looked at Eliza, at Millie. At Clara, then at the burned barn beams still visible beyond the yard, rebuilt but remembered. You put it in writing, he said. It is. Daniel took the document. Snow thickened outside. The house felt small but solid. Why now? Eliza asked quietly. Caldwell looked at her. Because I misjudged what you were protecting, he said. And what's that? He glanced around the room. Not land, he replied. Home. Silence settled again. Finally, Daniel extended his hand. Caldwell shook it, firm, brief, business, not friendship, but resolution. When Caldwell left, the snow had nearly covered his footprints before he reached the road. Millie peeked out the window. Is it over? Daniel looked out at the ridge, now softened under white. It's quiet, he said. Clara touched his arm. That's enough. Eliza stood on the porch later that night. The world looked clean under snow. The drilling towers in the distance still stood. The mine still operated north, but the western ridge, their ridge, was untouched. Silver still slept beneath it, and it would remain there not because they couldn't sell, but because they chose not to. Daniel stepped beside her. You're thinking again, he said. Yes. About what? She watched snow gather on fence posts. About how we started with nothing, she said softly, and ended up fighting for everything. Daniel nodded. You didn't end up, he corrected gently. You built, she smiled faintly. Find someone kind. They had find someone strong. They had that too. Behind them, Clara laughed softly at something Millie said inside. Warmth spilled through the doorway. The house no longer felt temporary. It felt rooted, protected, chosen. The silver beneath the soil would never shine in a jeweler's window. It would never line pockets. But above it stood something far rarer, a family that had survived fire, law. Greed, pressure, and snow fell quietly across the ridge as winter settled in, not as threat, but as promise. Because some things aren't meant to be mined, some things are meant to be kept. And some battles, once fought and won, changed the people who fought them forever. Spring did not arrive gently, it came roaring. Snow melted fast, feeding the streams until they rushed loud and wild across the lowlands. The western ridge glistened in sunlight, untouched and firm, as if it had survived not just winter, but everything before it. Life resumed in full motion. Calves were born, fields were replanted. The barn smelled of fresh hay instead of smoke. And for the first time since Eliza and Millie had walked that long dirt road barefoot, the future did not feel borrowed. It felt theirs. One afternoon, Clara stood at the stove kneading dough while Millie narrated a dramatic story about a heroic chicken that saved the coop from imaginary wolves. Daniel leaned against the counter, smiling in spite of himself. Eliza sat at the table with her new leather-bound ledger open beside her mother's worn journal. She was writing carefully, not copying anymore, adding. Clara glanced over. What's that one? Fever compress recipe, Eliza replied. Adjusted for dosage. Doc Harris said I was right about the willow bark concentration. Daniel looked at her with quiet pride. You planning on charging him for that advice? Eliza smiled faintly. Maybe someday. There was a knock at the door. This one carried no tension, no threat, just sound. Daniel opened it to find Reverend Thomas standing there with a broad grin. I heard the ridge remains yours, he said warmly. It does, Daniel replied, and I heard Miss Eliza here has been studying medicine. Eliza blinked. Reverend Thomas stepped inside. Town's talking, Clara laughed softly. They always do. The Reverend grew thoughtful. There's talk of building a small infirmary near the church, he said. Not a full hospital, just a place for tending. We could use someone apprenticing with Doc Harris. Eliza froze. Her heart leapt so suddenly it hurt. Daniel looked at her slowly. Do you want that? He asked. She swallowed hard. Yes. It wasn't hesitation, it wasn't fear. It was certainty. Clara wiped flour from her hands and cupped Eliza's cheek gently. Then we'll make it happen, Millie gasped dramatically. You're gonna be a doctor, Eliza laughed, a full laugh, bright and alive. Not yet, but someday. Later that evening, Daniel walked the western ridge alone. The ground was firm beneath his boots. The survey stakes were gone, the snow fully melted. He crouched and pressed his hand into the soil, silver beneath, untouched. He didn't feel regret. He felt peace. Behind him, Clara approached quietly. You ever think about selling a small parcel? She asked gently. Daniel shook his head. No, even if prices rise. Yes, she studied him. Why? He looked out over the pasture where Millie chased the dog, and Eliza stood pointing something out to Doc Harris, animated and confident. Because wealth built on fear isn't wealth, he said. And this land has had enough fear. Clara slipped her hand into his. Then we keep it. They stood like that for a long moment, wind moving gently through grass, no blasts, no smoke, just open sky. Weeks later, the infirmary plans began. Eliza spent afternoons shadowing Doc Harris, learning stitches, mixing tinctures, measuring carefully. She no longer read her mother's journal as something fragile, she read it as foundation. One evening, as the sun dipped gold behind the ridge, Millie sat on the porch steps beside Eliza. Do you think Mama can see us? She asked softly. Eliza looked west. I think she'd be proud, she said. Millie nodded seriously. I think so too. Inside, Clara called them in for supper. Daniel stood at the table setting 4 plates, 4, no hesitation, no doubt. Eliza paused at the doorway. She remembered the first night, the high chair. The pencil marks on the doorframe, the fear of being temporary. Now there were new pencil marks on the kitchen beam, Millie's height, her own, a life measured not in loss but in growth. Daniel caught her staring. You planning on outgrowing this house? He teased lightly. Maybe, she said. Not without building bigger first, he replied. She smiled. They had started with ashes, with grief. With dust in their lungs and fear in their bones, they had faced fire. Courts, greed, threats in the dark, and still they stood, not rich in silver, not famous, not powerful in the way investors measure power, but strong, rooted together. As the sun disappeared beyond the ridge one more time, Eliza felt something settle deep inside her. Not relief, not even victory, belonging. They had found someone kind, they had become someone strong, and the silver sleeping beneath their land would remain exactly where it belonged, undisturbed. Because the greatest treasure on Harper Ranch was never hidden in the earth, it was built above it, and that was worth more than anything money could mine. Summer brought heat that shimmered over the pasture like a living thing. The infirmary walls were halfway built beside the church now, simple timber, modest, strong. Townsfolk donated what they could. Some gave wood, some gave labor, some gave coins wrapped carefully in cloth. Eliza gave time. Every spare hour she had, Doc Harris had stopped calling her girl and started calling her Miss Carter. It made her stand straighter. She learned how to stitch without trembling, how to clean wounds without flinching, how to look at illness without letting fear cloud her hands. One afternoon, as she was grinding herbs at the infirmary table, a miner was brought in, coughing hard, shoulders shaking. Dust. The sound froze her blood for half a heartbeat. Her father's memory flashed bright and painful, but she didn't step back, she stepped forward. Sit him upright, she instructed gently. Slow breaths, not deep. Doc Harris watched her carefully. You've seen this before, he said quietly. Yes, she replied, and she had. She mixed the tincture steadily, no shaking hands, no tears, just purpose. The miner stabilized. Later that evening, Doc Harris leaned back in his chair and studied her. You'll be better than me, he said. Eliza blinked. No. Yes, he insisted softly, because you're not just treating bodies, you're remembering. The words stayed with her long after she rode home. On the ranch, Millie had taken to riding alone along the lower pasture, hat too big, grin too bright. Daniel watched her from the fence line, pride and fear wrestling in equal measure. She's growing fast, Clara murmured beside him. They both are, Daniel replied. Clara rested her head briefly against his shoulder. You ever think about Rose when you see them? Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded. Every day, Clara squeezed his hand. Do you still hurt? Yes, he said honestly. But it doesn't break me anymore. Clara smiled softly. That's what healing feels like. One evening, as supper dishes were drying, a familiar rider approached, not Caldwell, not a stranger, Victor. He stopped at the gate but did not enter. Daniel stepped outside calmly. Clara followed. Eliza stood just behind them. Victor looked older, harder, but not smug. I heard the mines north are slowing, he said quietly. They are, Daniel replied. Investors pulled some capital. Daniel didn't react. Victor shifted in the saddle. I'm not here to fight. No one answered. He glanced at Eliza. You've grown. She didn't smile. I always was. He gave a small nod. I won't trouble you again, he said. Daniel's voice was steady. You shouldn't, Victor hesitated. Then, surprisingly, I was wrong, he said. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Eliza studied him carefully. About what? She asked. About thinking blood meant control, he replied. Silence settled heavy. He didn't ask forgiveness. He didn't expect welcome. He simply turned his horse and rode away. For good this time, Eliza watched until he disappeared beyond the bend. Daniel exhaled slowly. Clara slipped her hand into his. Inside the house, the table was already set. 4 plates, 4 chairs, no fear in the air. Just evening light and the smell of bread. Later that night, Eliza sat alone on the western ridge. The drilling towers north stood silent now, some dismantled, some abandoned. Caldwell's expansion had slowed. The easy silver had been mined elsewhere. Profit moved on, but Harper Ranch remained. She pressed her palm into the soil once more, silver still beneath, untouched, and above it life, chosen, protected, built. Daniel joined her quietly. You thinking about leaving someday? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Yes, she admitted softly, to study more, to learn more. He nodded. Good. She looked at him, surprised. You're not afraid I won't come back? He smiled faintly. You don't build something strong so it cages people, he said. You build it so they can carry it with them. Her chest tightened. I'll always come back, she whispered. He believed her, because belonging isn't a chain, it's a root. And roots don't trap, they anchor. Below them, the house lights glowed warm against the darkening field. Clara's laughter floated faintly upward. Millie's voice followed. Eliza stood. The ridge no longer felt like battleground. It felt like foundation. Silver slept, history remained, and above it a family stood, not because they had never been shaken, but because they had chosen to stand anyway. The fight had changed them, hardened them, healed them. And as summer faded slowly toward autumn once more, Eliza realized something profound. They had started with loss. They had walked through fire. They had defended what could not be bought, and now they were no longer surviving, they were living. Fully, freely, and fiercely, and nothing beneath the soil could ever outshine that. Autumn returned the way it always did, quiet at first, then sudden. The grass turned gold, the air sharpened. The ridge glowed copper in the evenings like it was holding sunlight just a little longer before letting it go. Eliza stood at the infirmary doorway one late afternoon, sleeves rolled up, hands stained faintly green from crushed herbs. The building was finished now, small, sturdy, whitewashed, not grand, but real. A woman from the north pasture sat inside with a newborn wrapped tight in a quilt. Eliza moved carefully, confidently. Her breathing steady, she said softly. Keep her warm, small feedings, and rest yourself. The woman smiled weakly. You've got your mama's hands. Eliza's throat tightened, but she didn't let her voice shake. I hope so. When she stepped outside, the sun was sinking low over the ridge. Daniel was leaning against the fence across the road, watching her with quiet pride. You did good, he said when she reached him. I was scared, she admitted. Good, he replied, means you care. She glanced toward the western ridge where silver still slept beneath the soil. Sometimes I think about how close it came to being torn apart, she murmured. Daniel nodded. Sometimes I think about how close we came to losing you, he said quietly. She looked at him sharply. You didn't, he smiled faintly. No, but I almost did. The first night you knocked on that door, I could have said no. Silence settled between them. But you didn't, she said softly. No. They walked back toward the house together. Millie burst out the front door before they reached it, hair wild, laughing, waving a scrap of paper. Look, Reverend Thomas says I can start helping at the schoolhouse on Saturdays. Clara stepped out behind her, flower on her cheek and happiness in her eyes. Careful, she teased. You'll outgrow this place before we're ready, Millie grinned. I'll still come home. Good, Daniel muttered, pretending to scowl. Supper that night felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food. 4 plates. 4 voices overlapping. Clara telling a story from town, Millie dramatically reenacting a schoolhouse mishap, Daniel laughing deep and easy, Eliza listening, really listening to the rhythm of it all. After dishes were done, she slipped outside alone. The western ridge shimmered under the fading light. She remembered the first time she'd seen smoke rising from that distant house. The fear, the hunger, the desperate hope. She remembered carrying Millie on her back, remembered the high chair, the pencil marks on the doorframe. Now there were new marks inside. Millie's height scratched higher each season. Eliza's too, growth measured not in grief but in time. Footsteps approached. Clara stood beside her quietly. "You're thinking again," she said softly. "Yes. About leaving, someday," Eliza admitted, "to study further, maybe even in Helena." Clara didn't flinch. "You should," Eliza blinked. "You're not afraid I'll forget this place?" Clara smiled gently. "You don't forget where you learned what love feels like." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes, not from sadness, but from something fuller, gratitude, belonging, strength. Behind them, Daniel stepped onto the porch, leaning against the post. "You two plotting," he called lightly. "Always," Clara replied. Millie ran out next, flinging her arms around Eliza's waist. "You're not going nowhere tonight, right?" Eliza laughed, hugging her tight. "Not tonight." The sky deepened into purple and gold. The drilling towers north stood silent now, some dismantled, some abandoned entirely. Caldwell's company had moved on where profit ran easier. Victor had never returned, the threats had faded into memory, but the lessons remained. Eliza looked at the ridge one last time before heading inside. Silver still slept beneath the soil. It would stay there because the greatest treasure on that land was never buried. It was built from a choice made on a porch. Built from a woman brave enough to marry for love and protection. Built from a man who refused to sell what couldn't be replaced. Built from 2 sisters who walked until their feet bled and didn't stop. Inside, laughter filled the kitchen. Warm, alive, real. Eliza stepped over the threshold and felt it again, that deep, steady certainty. They had started with loss, they had faced fire, they had stood against greed. And they had chosen each other every single time. Some battles leave scars. Some battles leave strength. Harper Ranch carried both. And as autumn settled gently over the western ridge, Eliza knew something with absolute clarity. They were no longer the girls who knocked on the wrong door. They were the family who had built the right one. And nothing, no silver, no law, no fire would ever change that. Years do not announce themselves when they pass. They settle quietly into beams and fence posts, into laughter lines around eyes, into pencil marks carved higher and higher along the kitchen doorway. The first winter after the infirmary opened was mild. The second was not. A heavy storm rolled down from the mountains late one December night, wind howling like it meant to tear the world apart. Snow piled against the barn doors. Fences groaned, the roof trembled under the weight. Eliza was 17 now, not a child, not quite grown. She woke to shouting. "Daniel," Clara's voice cut sharp through the wind. Eliza was out of bed before she felt the cold floor. Millie, taller now, nearly reaching Eliza's shoulder, was already pulling on boots. "What is it?" Millie asked, breath fogging the air. "The north fence," Daniel shouted from the doorway. "If it goes, the hurdles scatter in this wind." Without thinking, Eliza grabbed her coat. "You stay," Daniel ordered. "No," she said firmly. The wind hit them like a wall, snow stung her face. The world beyond the lantern light was white chaos. They fought their way toward the north pasture, boots sinking deep. A section of fence had collapsed under drifting snow, boards splintered, wires snapped. The cattle were restless, panicked. One wrong move and they would bolt into the storm. "Spread wide," Daniel yelled over the wind. Slow and steady, Eliza moved without fear. Years ago she would have trembled. Now she stepped into the storm like it was just another battle to stand through. Millie flanked the other side, calling gently to the herd, her voice calm despite the roar of the wind. Clara held the lantern steady, shielding the flame with her body. Board by board, wire by wire, they reinforced the broken section long enough to guide the herd back toward the barn. It took hours. When they finally stumbled back inside, soaked and exhausted, the storm still howled, but the ranch stood. Millie collapsed into laughter first. "We did it," she shouted, breathless. Daniel leaned against the door, chest heaving. "You did," he corrected. Eliza felt something swell inside her chest, not pride alone, ownership. She wasn't just sheltered here anymore, she helped hold it together. Later that night, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Clara brushed wet hair from Eliza's face. "You didn't hesitate," she said softly. "I don't anymore," Eliza replied. Daniel looked at her across the room. "You were 10 when you walked here," he said quietly. 10. Eliza smiled faintly. "And stubborn," he laughed under his breath. That too, when the storm finally passed the next morning, the ridge stood white and shining. The barn held, the fences held, the house held, so did they. Weeks later, a letter arrived addressed to Eliza, Helena Medical College. She stared at the seal for a long time before opening it. Her hands didn't shake this time. She read it once, twice, then looked up at Clara and Daniel. "They accepted me," Millie screamed before Eliza could finish the sentence. Clara pressed both hands over her mouth, eyes filling. Daniel stood very still. "How long?" he asked gently. 2 years, silence, not heavy, not fearful, just big. Millie threw her arms around Eliza's waist. "You'll come back, right?" Eliza knelt and held her tight. "Always." That night she walked the western ridge one more time before spring thaw. The silver still slept beneath her boots. Untouched, unneeded, she didn't feel torn, she felt rooted. And roots don't trap, they steady you when you step away. Daniel joined her quietly. "You're ready," he said. "I think so," he nodded. "You were ready the first day you carried your sister down that road." Her throat tightened. "You could have turned us away." He shook his head. "No, you chose this place before I did." They stood in silence for a long moment. The wind was gentler now. Spring was coming. "You built something here," Daniel said softly. "Not just fences. Not just pasture, something that lasts." Eliza looked back toward the house, smoke rising steady from the chimney, Millie's silhouette in the window, Clara moving at the stove. "I didn't build it alone," she said. Daniel smiled. That's the point. Years ago, she had stood on this ridge afraid of losing everything. Now she stood there knowing something powerful. Nothing built on love and choice disappears when you step away. It travels with you. The ridge would remain. The ranch would stand, the silver would sleep, and she would go learn how to heal, not because she was running, but because she was strong enough to leave and strong enough to return. And as the sun dipped gold over the western ridge one more time before she left for Helena, Eliza felt it deep in her bones. They had started with loss. They had survived fire. They had stood against greed. They had rebuilt in storms. And now they were stepping forward, not as survivors, but as something far rarer. A family chosen, a home defended, a future claimed. And that was the richest thing Harper Ranch would ever hold. The morning Eliza left for Helena was bright and unfairly beautiful. The sky stretched wide and blue over Harper Ranch, like it had no idea how hard it was to step away from everything you love. Her trunk sat near the porch steps, modest but full, books, clothes, her mother's journal wrapped carefully in cloth, and the new leather ledger she had filled with her own notes. Millie hovered near it like if she stared hard enough, it might disappear. "You sure you need all that?" Millie asked, trying to sound teasing and failing miserably. Eliza smiled. "I'm not planning to forget anything important." Clara stood in the doorway, apron still on though she hadn't cooked yet. She looked composed, but her fingers twisted the fabric at her waist. Daniel loaded the trunk into the back of the wagon with steady hands, too steady. Eliza noticed everything. She walked once more to the western ridge before they left. The grass swayed gently in the wind. The land looked exactly as it had years ago, untouched, quiet, strong, silver still beneath. Untouched, protected. She pressed her hand into the soil, not in farewell, in promise. Footsteps approached behind her. Daniel. "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" he asked softly. "No," she said, but her voice trembled just a little. "That's good," he replied. "Because you're meant to go." She looked at him. "You're not afraid I'll grow into something different?" He smiled faintly. "I hope you do." Her throat tightened. "You don't build a home so it keeps people small," he said quietly. "You build it so they can leave knowing they belong somewhere." Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I belong here," she whispered. "And you always will," he answered. Clara joined them on the ridge. She didn't say much. She simply wrapped her arms around Eliza and held her tight. You carry us with you, Clara murmured, and you bring yourself back whole. Millie ran up last, breathless. You better write every week, she ordered fiercely. I will, and if someone's mean to you, Eliza laughed through tears, I'll handle it. Millie hugged her like she was trying to fuse their ribs together. They rode into town together. The wagon wheels creaked softly against the dirt road, the same road Eliza had once walked barefoot, starving and desperate. Now she rode it with purpose, with choice. At the train station, the platform felt loud and strange. Helena waited. Opportunity waited, uncertainty waited. Daniel lifted her trunk down. Clara adjusted Eliza's collar one last time. Millie wiped her own tears aggressively like she was offended by them. The train whistle blew in the distance. Eliza turned to them. 10 years ago, she had stood shaking in front of a stranger's door. Now she stood tall in front of her family. You saved us, she said suddenly. Daniel shook his head gently. You saved each other, Clara smiled through tears. We just kept the door open. The train pulled in, steam billowed, voices shouted. Eliza stepped up onto the platform. She turned one last time. They were there. Daniel's hand resting lightly at Clara's back, Millie waving both arms wildly. The house she had built inside herself felt steady, not fragile, not temporary. Belonging was no longer something she feared losing. It was something she carried. The conductor called out, Eliza Carter, she boarded. The train lurched forward. The ridge disappeared slowly behind her, swallowed by distance but not by memory. As Helena came into view hours later, Eliza pressed her mother's journal to her chest. Silver slept beneath Harper Ranch, untouched, unneeded, because the true wealth of that land had never been metal. It had been courage, choice, family, and she carried all of it with her. Back on the ridge, Daniel stood long after the train was gone. Clara slipped her hand into his. She'll come back, Millie said fiercely. Daniel nodded. I know, because some roots grow deep, and some journeys don't take you away, they bring you back stronger. Years later, people would speak of Harper Ranch not as the land with silver beneath it, but as the place where a broken man opened his door, where a brave woman chose love over ease, where two orphan girls became daughters, and where one young woman walked into the world not to escape, but to return someday stronger, wiser, and whole. And the western ridge would remain quiet, steady, holding its silver beneath the soil while above it a legacy far more precious endured.